Hey guys, welcome to another episode of TFL Today. And today, Andre, we've got a great topic and we've got a great guest. We've got Anton Wallman here, who is our industry expert, visiting all the way from, California via Las Vegas. And today we're going to be talking about the biggest news of the day, which is the fact that the DOJ and the EPA are suing FCA. Oh my gosh, that's a lot
of acronyms.
Yeah. And this is a big story because, of course, it now feels, Andre and Anton, like we're going down the road of what happened with Volkswagen. So let me give you a quick recap of what the news is. Basically, the Department of Justice and the EPA are contending that, and these are all allegations at this point, that FCA installed, and they're using this word, a cheating device, basically code, into their diesel engine, into the Ram 1500 Eco Diesel, and the same engine that is in the Jeep, that basically provided false and inaccurate amounts of data in regards to how much emissions come out of the tailpipe of that truck. So the software enabled the truck, or the Jeep in this case, to provide less emissions or below the threshold that the EPA set, and the code that was hidden, that's what the EPA is saying, in these vehicles was not disclosed. That's why they're calling it a cheat device. And the upshot of it is that right now, in terms of financial penalties directly associated with the lawsuit, they're looking at something like $4.66 billion.
That's
SCA. That's a lot of money, Anton, isn't it?
That's right.
All right, so there's the recap. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the implications for FCA. And Anton, you're kind of...
Some groundskeeping first. Yeah. I have my laptop here, so I'll be watching the comments and questions. So when you guys have comments, just put them down. And at the end of the show, we're going for about 30 minutes, right?
Yes.
In about 20 minutes, we'll address a lot of your comments and questions. We're also giving away a T-shirt. Can you show that?
Yeah, we're giving away a signed T-shirt to all of our Patreon fans and supporters. So if you guys are on our Patreon page, patreon.com/TFLcar, and you've signed up to support us, then we're going to give one of these away at random to one of our Patreon supporters at the end of the show as well. But let's talk about what this means for FCA. Now, of course, FCA, Anton, if you guys don't know, is the company that was formed after the bankruptcy of Chrysler. Fiat purchased Chrysler, so it includes a lot of major brands, which includes in Europe Fiat, Maserati, Lancia, which is a pretty small brand, and of course here in America it's Jeep, it's Ram,
Dodge,
and Chrysler. Yeah, it's a lot of companies. And when Volkswagen was hit with this same type of scandal, the numbers were staggering. I think Volkswagen had put aside $19 billion.
Oh, it's well above that now, and there's recent developments in France that could almost double those amounts. These things have simply not been resolved in the case of Volkswagen, although we think that we're got the majority of it behind us, but as we saw just recently here in France, we just haven't seen the end of it. In the case of Fiat Chrysler, they've been accused of similar things in Europe as well as here. So some of these defeat devices are legal, both in Europe and in the United States, but you have to disclose them. And the argument is, and I make no judgment as to the merits, that the argument goes that FCA did not disclose the existence of these multiple types of defeat devices. And
it's software, it's code.
It's some of it is, and some of it may not be, but it's in terms of how the engine reacts in certain situations, like under heavy loads, and you have to disclose what they do to the EPA. And the accusation by the Department of Justice is that they simply did not. And we have not yet seen a formal answer by FCA to this, but this all came into light in a major way in January when the EPA held a conference call. It was actually at the second press day of the Detroit Auto Show, as you may remember. And Fiat, basically, FCA responded by saying that we have been and we are in negotiations to resolve the matter. They thought that it would have been resolved by now, and as it turns out, it is simply not. And in the meantime, the EPA simply has not yet approved the 2017 models of the Ram 1500 Eco Diesel, nor the diesel version of the Jeep Grand Cherokee for sale in the United States. So that remains under negotiation as we speak.
Yeah, and we've been talking to our PR contacts at FCA, and what they've been telling us is that this is kind of a hiccup in the road. It's a minor deal, that they're going to come to some agreement with the DOJ and the EPA. And then yesterday, basically, the bombshell dropped where the DOJ and the EPA are now suing FCA. So they did not come to an agreement. They can still not sell the trucks and cars, which is costing them tens of millions of dollars.
The big issue for FCA is not, clearly the company is going to get approval to sell future versions of these vehicles. There's no question about that. It's just a matter of whether it happens this month or next or in 2, 3, 4, 5 months.
But every day it's...
The issue is really what the penalties are or are not going to be for the past alleged infractions. That's where the rubber meets the road. Nobody doubts that FCA is going to be able to tune these engines for compliance going forward. That can be done. Volkswagen could and are doing it, and FCA will be able to do it as well. It may take 2 or 3 or 4 months for the EPA to thoroughly test these things and now look at it 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 extra times. But I think the end result there is not in doubt. But there's a big difference between getting no fine at all and getting, whether it be 4.6 billion or some other amount. Remember, even if let's say theoretically that they were going to be hit with the highest amount, the 4.6 billion, which is probably unlikely, but nevertheless, let's just play with it. If they get hit with something like that, it doesn't end there, because
civil lawsuits.
They could be criminal lawsuits. Then they could be dealers could sue them, individuals could sue them. There could be you look at what portion of what cost Volkswagen now well over $20 billion were the actual lawsuits. That was a very small portion of it. The rest was buybacks, fixes, and all of this other stuff. And then you can say, well, if they get hit by this in the United States, what happens in other geographies? FCA sells a lot of things in Europe, not these two vehicles. Obviously, the Ram 1500, for example, is obviously not sold in Europe, but they have tons of other little diesel cars that, once they are investigated and so forth, could it lead to something? Well, we don't know. So it wouldn't end at 4.6 billion if it were to come to that. So clearly FCA wants this to go away for a tiny portion of that.
Now, there's an important fact that we have to stress here, guys, and that is that, unlike Volkswagen, FCA has not stipulated that they did anything wrong. So FCA is saying that everything they did was above board, that the so-called defeat devices were just part of normal software that the vehicles needed in daily operations. And so keep in mind, Volkswagen, of course, did say they agree that what they did was basically cheat the government and cheat their customers, and that's what cost them.
That's right.
FCA has not stipulated that. They are saying that this is just an issue with the way that the government is regulating them.
Yeah, it's really an issue, in part at least, of whether they fail to disclose the existence of these defeat devices. It was essentially a paperwork error, right? We forgot. There was a misinterpretation of what part we needed to disclose precisely. So, since the company has not yet provided a formal legal response, we haven't read their entire explanation for this. But this is the way that they had been talking about the matter ever since approximately January 11th, when this first came into the public light.
Now, there's 2 other things that we do need to bring in at this point, and they're hugely important, and they have a lot to do with where the market is going. First, Anton, this week another thing happened, and that is 20 Daimler offices were raided in Europe, across Europe, by about 250 German officers for exactly the same issue. Right? Now we're looking at Volkswagen and FCA and Mercedes potentially being in the same thing. So it's starting to feel like this kind of, I don't know if you call it cheating, whatever you want to call it, is something that is within the entire industry. It's not just a few bad apples, but it's systematic. It seems to be something that every auto manufacturer, and the French are also looking down the gun at this.
Yeah, so there are 2 points here to be made, right? First of all, people often say that Europe has far more stringent emissions laws than the United States. On paper, they sort of do when you look at
Euro 5?
Euro 6 and so forth, in terms of what these cars are allowed to emit. But there is an asterisk in Europe, and that is that essentially, once you see the headline number for grams per CO2 and NOx and so forth, they essentially are allowed, almost right out of the box, to exceed these by a factor of 2x or even more. And in the United States, that's not the case. I mean, the number that you see at the top of the line is essentially the reality. So in the US, these defeat devices, as they were, are more or less not allowed to anywhere near the same extent. They can only be used under certain very special exemptions, very extreme cases to protect the engine from being damaged. In Europe, the rules are simply a lot looser. So in reality, car companies in Europe were able to get away with things that simply U.S. laws were not. And that's why the debate about an infraction becomes very different in the U.S. versus in Europe on this. The other thing, though, is that, think about this, right? Ram was the only 1500 class, half-ton class pickup truck for sale in the United States with a diesel. Ford didn't have one, GM didn't have one, neither did Nissan, neither did Toyota. They all have diesels, or almost all of them anyway, for the 2500 and 3500 class type vehicles, but not in the 1500. Now we're less than a full year away from the market leader in the segment overall, Ford obviously, coming to market with a 1500 class, meaning the Ford F-150 diesel. This will be a 3-liter V6. I think it's made in England.
Yep.
It's closely related to what you can buy today
Land
in a
Rover?
Range Rover, etc., Land Rover
yeah.
Discovery. So that will be available.
Comes out of the same plant.
That's right. Will be available by March of next year. So you have the market leader here, where the entire F Series, which last year sold just over 800,000 units, granted some of them were the 3/4 tons and the full tons and slightly above that, but still a large chunk of that 800,000 were the actually F-150, and FCA was selling the Ram 1500 with diesels to the tune of over 10 percentage points. I think the number was 12 or 13% over the last 2 years. So
It's a big number.
that's right. So if Ford were to get a similar percentage, 12 or 13% off of the F-150, we could be talking about something not too far from maybe 80,000 units a year in the United States.
A lot of trucks, dude.
That is a huge number. I mean, 80,000 of a very profitable product, clearly Ford's most profitable product, maybe with the exception of custom vans and police interceptors, right? Potentially. You look at the economic impact of Ford for all of the turbulence surrounding the departure just a couple of days ago of its CEO. I mean, this is going to be a huge deal for Ford's bottom line.
But do you have doubts? So there's all these lawsuits, right, against diesel vehicles and pressure against Volkswagen from 2 years ago. And now there's a lot of passenger cars that are thinking about introducing diesel engines. Like Mazda is talking about a diesel in their CX-5. GM wants to put diesels in their Equinox and the Terrain crossovers. Ford is coming out with a diesel. But there's so much kind of negative energy around this. Do you have any doubts that Ford may delay this engine or maybe not even come out at all?
Well, you can never be 100% certain,
Yeah.
but I think we're looking at a near 100% probability. There was a very good interview that was just broadcast. I think it had been conducted about a month ago with the new head of propulsion systems for GM. It was just broadcast on this Thursday by at Autoline. Dan Nicholson, I believe is his name. He forecasted that GM was going to be essential in doubling the diesel percentage market share in the United States from today. Or if you look at diesel market share, it's about 3%. That includes heavy-duty trucks, so 2,500, 3,500. Very small portion are passenger cars and so forth. But he thought that was going to go to 6% in just the next 2-3 years.
Guys, I think that there's an important distinction to be made here, right? We're talking about trucks and we're talking about cars.
Yes.
Now, my sense is that in the car world, diesels are on life support, right? This has been almost a death blow, Volkswagen's lawsuit, to diesel, at least the way that the buyer perceives them. People think they're dirty. People think that they're just radioactive at this point. Now, that is not the case with trucks. I think trucks and diesels go together like peanut butter and jelly in a lot of ways, and truck buyers, even with the Colorado Canyon twins, with the baby Duramax, aren't fazed by the issues of government regulation. In fact, it's probably a mark of distinction, right? When you look at all the guys out there who are rolling coal, all the guys who are out there stripping off all their emission stuff. In trucks, the dirtier you are doesn't necessarily mean the worse you are. To a lot of people. To some, of course, it does, but to a lot of people, not necessarily. So I think we have to separate cars and trucks. So in the truck world, I think Anton is absolutely right. There's almost 100% chance that Ford is going to come out with that diesel F-150. There's a lot of buzz around it. I've been getting a lot of comments about people interested in it. In the car world, Anton, have you looked at the latest numbers? How's the new Jaguar with the little baby diesel selling?
Funny you should ask. I just ran the numbers on that because I have the exact numbers as of the end of April.
Yeah.
So Range Rover full size, Range Rover Sport, and the various Jaguar models, the XF and the XE.
XE with a little diesel, yeah.
That's right, and the F-Pace. They're not running on the Range Rover side. I think the number was just about 15% diesel,
Okay.
and on the Jaguar side about 13%.
So it's about the same as in the truck world, actually.
That's right. It's not too far from it. Now, keep in mind, they don't have a lot of competition. In fact, almost no competition right now. You got the BMW 3 Series sedan and the wagon.
And those have not done well.
Those have not done as well. That's right. But what's coming on the market? You mentioned the Chevy Equinox, the GMC Terrain. They'll both be on the market by about no later than September this year, and they'll be the only SUVs in the market that'll print an EPA label of 40 miles per gallon highway. Not bad for an SUV. No, that's not a 3-row SUV, but an SUV nevertheless. And then we have the Mazda CX-5. Will be in the U.S. market probably by October, and it will be marketed by Mazda as their performance engine. 2.2 liter 4-cylinder. It'll perform better than the gasoline equivalent model. So we have a few new test cases coming on the market imminently.
So I would say there's a lesson there to be learned. First of all, the latest Cruise by Chevy does not come with the diesel, even though the previous generation did.
But they're working on it.
No, it's coming right now. It's hitting the market.
It's just hitting the market right now.
Yeah, so the EPA label on the new Cruise on the manual is 52 miles per gallon highway. It's a bit lower on the automatic version, although the blended city highway for some reason was the exact same numbers, like 39 or something like that. I forget the exact number. But yeah, so that one is just hitting the market right now. And Dan Nicholson commented in this interview the other week that basically they don't know what percentage it will. I mean, in the Cruise, you can imagine it'll be very, very small. I think the lifetime of the previous generation Cruise diesel was just barely 12,000 units over a 2 to 3 year period, which is not even a rounding error for the Cruise. The new one may or may not. I mean, they just don't know, but they want to provide an alternative to people.
So I guess what I'm saying is I think that the automakers are realizing that the meat of the market is in the crossover world, and so putting diesels in
That's right.
small cars doesn't make a lot of sense. But maybe
That's
putting
100%
them
right.
in
So
crossovers and SUVs makes sense.
we're seeing that in Europe too, is that the cost to clean up these diesels. I mean, in Europe you had the really tiny, the subcompact cars that have been selling as a diesel now in Europe for the last 25 years. The Europeans are starting to abandon them more. The threshold for where you can make a diesel economical is higher and higher. And you're 100% right, Roman. In the United States, you're probably not going to see them in regular sedans very much, but you will definitely see them in larger and larger SUVs. The GM head of propulsion basically hinted to the notion that future Suburbans and Tahoes were going to be getting diesels, and I think that's probably where it's going, because you can get 30 to 32% better fuel economy on a large SUV. That's a big deal in a big rig.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we saw some prototypes of the next generation GM trucks testing in the Colorado mountains.
And they looked like they had diesel exhaust.
Well, I'm not sure because they have sometimes modified their exhaust systems to a emissions test.
Yeah, but you saw the indentations
No, I did
on
not.
them.
I did not.
No.
I cannot say for sure.
Yeah, I think looked like we saw them. We don't know. Like, obviously, we don't know.
But GM is hinting very clearly
Yes.
that the Suburban, the Tahoe, the Silverado will be getting diesels at some point in the next 2 or so years, and it would make perfect sense. And the other hint, FCA has at least temporarily left the market. Ford is coming out with one. How can GM not get into it?
Exactly.
I mean, it would be crazy for them not to.
Yeah, that would be leaving a lot of money on the table.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this from an industry standpoint, right? We all know that Sergio Marconi, the CEO of FCA, has for a long time been trying to court other companies to basically partner with, right? He's tried GM. I mean, the company has been struggling to be profitable, and what's been keeping it afloat, of course, is Ram and Jeep, the two brands that are
Mainly, yes.
Yeah, mainly, and he spun off Ferrari from the brand because he didn't want that.
Well, it was a very profitable spin-off. I mean, they got a lot of money for it.
They got a lot of money for it, yeah. So what does this scandal potentially, these fines, do to the prospect of not only the survival of FCA, but the chance of them merging with somebody? Because I've heard that, that might be a good fit for somebody like Volkswagen, actually.
Well, you're talking
No, I'm
about
serious.
a problematic situation. I mean, maybe two people who have the same problem, can find solace in each other. But I was going to make some analogy there on the.
But think about the two brands that Volkswagen will be getting if they merged, right? They'd
No.
be getting Jeep. They don't have a strong off-road brand.
The practical, here's the
they'd be
thing.
getting
The
Ram.
reason why I don't think any of that will happen is it has to do with labor relations and unions and
Good point.
the synergies that would be obtained by doing any of these things are so hard fought by the unions that even though they make perfect sense from an industrial economic standpoint, they're very hard to pull off because you're going to put the rationale for putting these together is joint R&D, which they're doing anyway to some degree. All of these companies have joint R&D projects. Daimler with Nissan, Honda with GM, FCA with Google. I mean, Google is a big partner of FCA in terms of autonomous driving. I mean, Google can't find good enough things to say about FCA. I mean, the Chrysler Pacifica is the most wonderful creature they've ever touched in terms of putting together an autonomous vehicle, right? I mean, they're driving all over Silicon Valley and now in other cities.
Okay, so I agree with that, but 6-7 years ago, right, we went through a very turbulent time. We went through a time where in the U.S. we went from 16 million units cars and trucks
Correct.
to about 10 million.
Correct.
And when things like that happen, there's a lot of upheaval, and even though you have all this systematic headwind, right, where you're saying the unions won't allow it, and in Germany the politics and unions aren't inseparable, but when you start to have an economy that's starting to slowly change, right, things change, and people do look at potential partnerships in a way that they wouldn't, and a good look at that would be Ford, right?
That's right.
Ford just basically reshuffled the deck
But
chairs.
here's why I don't think that'll happen in the case of FCA.
Yeah.
We look at FCA here in the United States as a very U.S.-centric situation.
Sergio lives here.
Maybe, but they're
Detroit,
now
he lives in Detroit for the most part.
There are now Jeep factories in Italy,
Yeah.
Brazil, Mexico, India, and China.
Yeah.
5 countries right there.
Yeah.
Jeep is expanding like crazy around the world. It used to be a distinctly U.S. brand. I mean, the Jeep Renegade that we're buying right here, right now for the last 1 year or more is made in Italy. The Jeep Compass that is arriving in dealerships in the last month or so is made in Mexico. And the Jeeps that will be consumed in England will be made in India. You talk about, reverse colonialism and so forth. I mean, you have all of these things going on. So FCA, for all of its faults, they are profitable.
Yeah.
Their profits are increasing. And even though sales in the United States are stalling a little bit right now, sales on a worldwide basis is growing for them. FCA is growing very well in Europe. They're growing like weed in Brazil, in India, and in China. So we'll look at this as a problematic company because they're not gaining market share anymore at the moment in the United States. But FCA's profits are increasing. 2 years from now, the company might be debt-free. Their balance sheet, while not the best in the world, is not terrible. So the company will be debt-free. Profits are in existence already, and they are increasing and almost doubling year over year. This is not a terrible situation. I don't think that, sure, would they like to be more profitable? Should they be more profitable? Ought they be more profitable? Yes, yes, and yes. But they don't have their back against the wall. They're not. This is not a do or die thing. This is not 2008, 2009 again, when they were literally, on the backs, ready to file the bankruptcy papers. This is not that situation at all. They're in decent shape.
All right, guys, we want to know what you guys think. This is your chance to take part in this conversation. If you have any questions for Anton or myself or Andre, Andre's watching the computer. Andre, what do you got there?
Yeah, so we have a lot of people joining, and actually from around the world. We have people from Texas, Virginia, also Italy. Somebody from Las Vegas is joining us right now. So
Yeah, my neighbor, yeah.
so thank you for
taking part in this conversation. So what are some questions that people
there's
asking?
some tension here. I mean, some of this conversation could go very political, and we're trying to stay out of politics here.
Yeah, let me just explain this. This is very important. We have commandments here at TFL, and one of the commandments is we do not go political. So we just don't, and so we're going to keep out of politics. But
There's technology, economics, and finance.
yeah, and by the way, if you're curious about some of the other commandments, another one is like don't stand in front of a car when doing a burnout because you could die. These are just very basic things.
No upside there.
No upside
But,
there.
I mean, some people are saying, is EPA picking on the FCA? Did they need another scapegoat or something, or was
The
there
answer,
any
short
favorite-
answer is we don't know. We
Yeah,
just
we
don't
don't
know.
know. We don't know.
We're not
We don't
inside
know
the
politics
minds of
yet.
those people. This will be an interesting debate in the courts. I think what will be most interesting to see is probably very soon, probably within weeks, we're going to have a formal response from FCA, not just a public statement,
Right.
but a legal response.
It was like a 3-paragraph.
That's
press
right. We're
release or
talking about
something.
a long and exhaustive legal response, and after we read that, we'll have a better sense of the answer to that.
Okay. What
A lot of people are obviously interested. A lot of questions come from GM. Will the Silverado have a 4-cylinder diesel? And will they continue to invest in diesel technology in the SUVs? Will Ford put a diesel in their Expedition? If they're doing one in F-150, would that make sense to put a diesel in the Expedition as well?
I think it would. I'd be shocked if they didn't.
There's one thing that we need to address here. Diesels carry a pretty significant premium. So in the ZR2, for instance, if you get the diesel,
$3,500.
$3,500 more, and I think that Ford engine that's also in the Range Rover and Land Rover. I think in that the premium. How much is the premium?
Well, in the Range Rover charges $2,000.
$2,000.
It's a different story. It's a luxury vehicle.
Yeah.
So.
That's right, but keep in mind, think about why Range Rover probably charges a smaller premium than the actual cost. They need to get their average fuel consumption down in order to meet their nationwide targets.
Yep.
So they're willing to essentially subsidize
Nice.
it. In the case of a pickup truck, whether it's Ram, Ford, GM, anybody, that's not happening, right? They sell these things at a minimum at cost premium. So if that's $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, I don't think that they will be discounting that. You're going to be paying what the real additional cost is. But in the case of GM, that 4-cylinder is quote unquote only $3,500. You can view that as the floor. That's a 4-cylinder. So now the 6-cylinder engine in say the Ford F-150, there's no way that premium is going to be less than say $4,500.
Yeah, that's what I've
Well,
heard.
the EcoDiesel was about $4,300.
That's right.
Yeah.
So exactly,
Yeah.
$4,500 sounds like a reasonable guess.
So are you guys willing to pay a $4,000 or $4,500 premium
At least.
at least on top of the cost of your F-150? Any more questions before we
For
wrap
a
this up?
30% improvement in fuel
It
economy.
depends what
Yeah,
happens with the
that's-
cost of fuel, of course.
That's kind of the trade-off there. A lot of conversation about the Demon because the Demon pricing was announced
Right.
yesterday.
Yep.
So obviously it's $86,000 to start. So there you guys.
I'm surprised it wasn't more. I'm surprised it wasn't more.
About $20K more than Hellcat.
Yeah, but you can imagine those will be selling at a premium.
Yeah,
out of the gate,
I think if you find one under 100, you'll be lucky.
something like that.
Yeah.
Mark is mentioning Cummins, and this is an interesting thing because I was just at the Overland Expo in Arizona, and Cummins is rolling out their crate engines, and part of that is a 2.8 liter 4-cylinder that they're going to be
They've
selling.
been
as-
rolling it out for like 3 years.
Yes, and GM's been promising a diesel for a long time. So and Mazda pulled this where they promised
6,
one
they
and the Mazda
promised
6
one
and
and
they
they never
pulled out.
delivered it.
So I
was there when the CEO said it's coming.
That's right. No, and the answer is that it eventually now will show up in October for Mazda. It just
the CX-5.
didn't yet. Now they in the CX-5. That's right. And of course, once it's shown up in the CX-5, that if that works out well, they get a good take rate. You can easily see it in the CX-9 and whatever over time.
All right, Andre, I think it's time we wrap this up. Anton, you were, as always, a wealth of knowledge. I'm so grateful that you took the time out of your actually vacation to come and do this live show with us. We're very lucky that Anton works with us. He's just a great resource to have.
And where can they find you?
Yeah, where can they find you?
I publish primarily, but not exclusively, on Seeking Alpha. I also publish sometimes on The Street, as well as sometimes for TFL.
Yeah, so check out. And then, Andre, who are we giving the this wonderful signed T-shirt to? Who's getting it? What Patreon?
So I looked at patreon.com/TFLcar, and a lot of you guys are donating. We appreciate that greatly because it helps us make better videos, better stories and all that stuff. And I picked a name at random this morning, Matthew Walters.
Congratulations, Matt. This is your shirt. I hope you need an XL. I hope you're a big dude. If not, we've got other sizes. And the other thing I want to say before we sign off is Charlotte Roadcap, our new team member, she just graduated with her degree in chemistry, and so she put together, I think, a very apropos series called The Chemistry of Cars. So basically, what happens in the chemistry that has to do with a car or a truck.
And it's very pertinent to the conversation we just had, because she talked about diesel exhaust fluid and how that works, the chemistry of it. And so check it out. We're going to be publishing that soon.
Tomorrow on TFL Car, the very first episode, the chemistry of cars, and it talks about how diesel emissions and are
and why it's important to clean them up.
Yeah, why it's important to clean them up and how they're cleaned up in the chemistry of that.
Because a lot of people say, why clean it up at all? Just release all the power. Release.
Because it does cost power.
Delete everything. Delete all those systems. But Charlotte has a good way of explaining how it affects the air we breathe. The nitrogen oxides are really not good. So
those are real pollution. That's the black smoke and related. That's a real pollution.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. As always, this is Roman and
Anton
and Andre saying check out TFL Car and TFL Truck for more news, views, and of course real world reviews.